I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. It was Thursday, the sort of Thursday that drifts in like it has nowhere else to be. I was leaning against the counter at her bookstore, half-shelved novels on either side, pretending to organize a display I'd done 3 times before. She appeared from the back, carrying a stack of dog-eared paperbacks, and I realized I'd been staring without noticing. "Hey," she said, not a greeting, just a soft acknowledgement that I existed. Her voice was calm, but there was a kind of weight to it, the way someone speaks when they notice things most people don't. Hi, Mrs. Bennet." I swallowed the hesitation, but the sound felt too formal. She smiled, just slightly, and I thought about how she always remembered my order at the little cafe next door: black coffee, 2 sugars, no cream, even though I'd been coming there for months. It was a trivial thing, but that kind of remembering made me feel seen in a way I hadn't realized I craved. "You're helping with the inventory today?" she asked, tilting her head. I nodded, fumbling with a stack of old journals. My hands felt too big, clumsy, around the thin paper. "Yeah, I thought I'd get ahead." I tried to sound casual. She glanced at my notebook, then flicked her eyes toward her hands, smoothing the sleeve of her cardigan. I noticed, because it made her small in that moment, the quiet gestures that didn't belong to anyone else. We worked in silence for a while, the kind that doesn't press but hangs lightly, the sound of pages turning, the soft hum of the fluorescent lights, the occasional thud when I misplaced a book. I found myself watching her out of the corner of my eye, the way she bent over the counter, fingers brushing the worn wood, how she paused mid-step when she caught something in her peripheral vision. At some point, she asked, "You still see your friends much?" I hesitated, unsure how to answer. The truth was, not really. Weekends blurred into weekdays. Messages went unsent, calls paused mid-dial. Loneliness wasn't a thing I could name, but it lived in the spaces I left empty, the texts I didn't send, the half-remembered plans that dissolved before they began. "Not a lot," I said finally. She nodded, as if she understood more than I said. That's okay. Sometimes quiet suits you." I felt my throat tighten. Quiet. It was supposed to be neutral, a gentle observation, but I felt a flicker of guilt mixed with something else. Something heavier, though I couldn't name it yet. A stack of returned library books sat between us. She picked one up, a novel I hadn't seen before. "I almost forgot. Your friend mentioned you might help me with a little project." She didn't elaborate. Just the word project, casual, but my chest jumped. I cleared my throat, trying not to stare. "Sure, what kind of project?" She smiled that half-smile again, eyes sliding toward mine for the barest second too long. "I'll explain later. Can you come by tonight?" The words hung there. Just like that, ordinary Tuesday afternoon had tilted. My fingers drummed the edge of a notebook, but I didn't look away. The flicker in her eyes, the faint scent of her perfume, the way she lingered near the doorway. It was all slow, small, charged in a way that made my heartbeat uneven. "Tonight," I repeated, uncertain. "Tonight," she said, picking up her stack of books and moving toward the back room. She didn't say goodbye, just left, and somehow that was enough to make the air feel heavier, filled with a question I wasn't ready to answer. I watched her go, hands tied around a notebook I wasn't supposed to touch, and realized I was thinking about her longer than I should. Longer than I'd thought I would. The door clicked shut behind her. My phone buzzed on the counter. A message from an unknown number. "See you tonight. MB." And just like that, everything had shifted. I found myself at her bookstore that evening, the late light from the window catching dust motes in the air. She was behind the counter, the same calm posture, but somehow softer, like the edges of her were just a little less sharp when no one else was around. "Thanks for coming," she said, setting down the stack of papers she'd been sorting. There was a pause, the kind of pause that made the air feel warmer and heavier at once. "Sure," I said. My hands felt too big on the table. I pushed them together, trying to keep them from trembling, or at least from feeling obvious. She handed me a mug of tea, cinnamon scent curling faintly upward. "I've been meaning to tell you, these old ledgers, sometimes they surprise me. Like yesterday, I found a note I'd scribbled years ago about my own son's school project." Her voice softened. "I guess he always needed a little extra help, you know? I try to be there, even when I wasn't sure I was doing it right. I nodded, sipping the tea, letting the warmth settle into my hands. Something in the way she said it, casual, unpolished, honest, made my chest tighten. Not pity, not exactly. Just noticing her like I hadn't before. I get that, I said slowly. My words sounded smaller than I meant them to. I'm not always sure about things either. About school, friends, everything. She gave a faint smile, almost self-deprecating. We're all figuring it out. Some of us just start a little later than others. We moved quietly among the shelves, stacking books, the scrape of pages and occasional cough filling the spaces between us. I imagined how it would feel to tell her something I hadn't told anyone else. The thought made me both ridiculous and bold. Age, circumstance, the fact that I was her friend's kid, it all pressed against me like a weight I couldn't ignore. At one point, I handed her a book from the top shelf. Our fingers brushed. Brief, almost accidental, but enough to spark that awareness again, the same kind I'd felt when she'd smiled that first afternoon. I pulled my hand back, aware that I was pretending to be careful, but part of me wanted to linger, just a fraction longer. She tilted her head, noticing my hesitation. "You always do that," she said softly, a dry sort of humor. Frown, pause, then overthink it. I chuckled, a little awkward, and she let the corners of her mouth lift, just slightly. Her gaze lingered on mine longer than necessary, and I felt that quiet friction between us, like we were teetering on something neither of us could name, but both felt. We settled at a small table near the window, 2 steaming mugs between us. The shadows stretched, silent, and I realized I hadn't noticed how much I'd missed this. The quiet, the shared space, the way she seemed to know when to speak and when not to. She reached for a pen to mark a page in one of the ledgers. I watched her hand, how it moved with a calm precision, and something in me ached. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. When she looked up, her eyes met mine, and she smiled faintly. Not a smile for the books or the task, but for the shared silence. She let her fingers brush mine again, this time deliberately, though only for a heartbeat. And that touch, small, ordinary, almost nothing, was enough to make everything feel like it had shifted. I thought I had it figured out, that slow rhythm between us, the quiet work, the shared tea, the half-smiles. But tonight, the bookstore felt smaller, tighter somehow, like the walls were leaning in. She was arranging some old pamphlets on a low shelf, and I crouched across from her, trying not to notice how her hair fell across her cheek when she bent. I shouldn't. I knew I shouldn't. But my eyes kept finding her, the soft curve of her neck, the way her fingers lingered over the edge of a book. I cleared my throat. I should check the back room, I said, mostly to escape the pull I felt. She didn't look up. "Take your time," she murmured. Her voice floated, but not entirely comforting. I wanted it to be. I paced slowly, trying to organize my thoughts. Each step felt louder than it should. What was I doing here? What was this feeling? A knock at the door made us both jump. The bell above the entrance jingled, and a college friend of mine popped in, waving at me. "Hey, man, thought you were free tonight." I tensed, immediately aware of the change, of how different this ordinary, quiet evening had felt until now. She turned slightly, catching sight of him, eyes flickering just a fraction. Not reproach, not curiosity, something else. Something guarded. I'm busy," I said quickly, my voice too loud, too rushed. My friend shrugged, gave a wave, and left, leaving the door to click softly behind him. We stood in silence. I wanted to say something, but words felt heavy. My hands itched to reach for her, to touch her hair, to steady the small tremor in my chest, but I froze. She stacked another pamphlet and paused, looking at me. Her gaze was sharp for a second, but then softened, almost like she was measuring herself against whatever line she'd set. "Sometimes people seem more than you expect," she said quietly, turning away. I wanted to ask what she meant. Instead, I bent to pick up a fallen book, and our hands brushed again. Longer this time. Too long. My heart stuttered. I wanted to linger, to let that brush mean more. But I didn't. We moved toward the counter, both of us silent now. My mind replayed that touch over and over. Imagine what it might feel like if it lingered. If our faces were closer. If I looked up and caught her staring at me, eyes dark and uncertain. Her lips parted just slightly, and for a heartbeat, I thought she might. But then she blinked, pulled back, and straightened. The ledgers, she said, voice even almost businesslike. I exhaled slowly, almost a laugh escaping, but it stayed lodged in my chest. The near gesture, so close it felt like we'd already crossed some invisible line, hung in the air between us. Neither of us spoke, but the silence was heavier than any words I could have said. I didn't know whether to feel relief or longing. Probably both. And for the first time, I realized how much I was trying not to ruin this delicate balance. I hadn't seen her all week. Not a text, not a call, not the faintest hint that the bookstore was open. The emptiness felt heavier than the usual silence, like a room I'd been inhabiting had suddenly lost its walls. I found myself walking past the corner where the little cafe sat, the one she sometimes lingered at after closing the store. A soft drizzle was falling, turning the streetlight reflections into streaks of gold and gray. And there she was, umbrella in hand, seated alone on the bench outside, staring down at the damp pavement. I slowed. My shoes made soft splashes against the wet sidewalk. She didn't look up. I hesitated, unsure if I should call out. Part of me wanted to run. Part of me wanted to sit there, silent, and let her notice me. I said finally low, almost a whisper. She looked up, startled, and for a moment I saw the fracture, the way her eyes tightened at the corners, the brief tremor in her hands. Not anger, not sadness exactly, something else, a mixture of guilt and fear, maybe. I didn't mean to. I trailed off, words losing shape because I had no idea what I meant. She shook her head, folding the umbrella against her lap. No, it's okay. I just needed some space. Her voice was calm, but it carried a weight that pressed into my chest. I sat beside her anyway, careful to keep the distance polite, but my shoulder brushed hers, and I felt it anyway. I was worried, I admitted. About us, I guess. Her hands tightened on the umbrella. I'm not supposed to be part of this, she murmured. Her gaze dropped to the street again. I shouldn't make it easy. I swallowed. The words hung in the air like rain. My fingers itched to reach out, to touch her hand, her arm, anything that felt like a lifeline. But I stopped, just sat, listening. I keep imagining things, I said finally. Things that shouldn't exist. And yet, I can't stop. My voice shook slightly, not with anger, but with something raw, like admitting the thought might actually be true. She didn't respond at first, just exhaled, shoulders trembling the tiniest fraction. Then, almost silently, she said, "Oh." The pause that followed was heavier than anything we'd shared. The drizzle continued, the streetlights pooling golden reflections on wet asphalt. She lifted her gaze just enough to meet mine, and it was the most exposed I'd ever seen her, vulnerable, careful, human. I don't know if I should feel guilty, she said, or if I should just let it be. I wanted to ask her to stay, wanted to close the space between us, to let the air shift, let something irreversible happen. But I didn't. I stayed quiet, because quiet felt safer than words. And then she tilted her head slightly, eyes searching mine, the question unspoken but clear. Do you understand what this could mean? I didn't answer. I couldn't. The street hummed around us, the drizzle, the distant car tires, the faint hum of life moving on. I only watched her and felt the weight of that question press against me, heavy and impossible. The bookstore smelled like old paper and rain when I pushed the door open. The bell tinkled, but no one answered. I thought maybe she'd left a note. Nothing. I wandered toward the counter and saw it. Her phone, face up, a message preview lingering on the screen. I shouldn't have looked, but the temptation was too small to resist. Can we talk about the kids? I froze. My chest tightened, pulse spiking. Kids. Plural. My stomach twisted into knots. I thought the obstacles were only age, timing, and circumstance. Now, there was something I hadn't known, something she hadn't said. I sat down at the small table, still damp from the drizzle outside, and tried to sort it. Was it her children, or someone else's? Her ex? The thought made my hands clammy. I wanted to ask, but even the thought of the question made my throat tighten. She appeared then, from the back room, hands still damp from washing dishes or maybe just wiping down the counters. She didn't notice me at first, and I watched her, heart hammering, as though seeing her move could tell me everything or nothing at all. I said finally, voice too quiet, almost swallowed by the hum of the lights. She looked up, startled, and for a moment I saw something flicker in her eyes. Relief, guilt, hesitation. Probably all three. "Hey," she said softly, voice careful, measured. "Not warm, not cold, just contained." I tried to smile. "You didn't answer your phone this week." Her eyes dropped, tracing a line on the counter. I needed to think. I nodded. "Right. Thinking. Makes sense." We moved silently through the rows of books. I wanted to ask about the kids, about the message. Wanted to peel back the layers she kept so carefully tucked away. But I didn't. Instead, we fell into that quiet rhythm we'd had before, but it fell off. Fragile. The air was heavier than it should have been. At one point, she handed me a book, and our fingers brushed. The same pull I felt before surged in my chest, but now it came with something else. Caution, hesitation, the awareness of unknown stakes I couldn't name. I cleared my throat. "You're okay." She nodded, not meeting my eyes. "I am. Just complicated." We lingered for a moment, the silence stretching, layered with everything unsaid. I wanted to ask if she needed me to leave, or if she wanted me to stay. I wanted to speak and pause and speak again. But I stayed frozen, letting the tension hang like the thick scent of wet pages. Eventually, I set my mug down and stood. "I should go." She didn't respond immediately, just turned back to the counter. No look, no word, just the soft scrape of paper on wood. I walked to the door, and my hand hovered over the handle. Her empty gaze didn't follow me. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the puddles reflected the streetlights like mirrors, fractured, unclear. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. And the bookstore, usually a place of quiet warmth, felt suddenly like a room I couldn't enter, a seat she'd left empty without knowing she had. She was in the kitchen, the small overhead light casting a warm glow over chipped tiles and mismatched mugs. I lingered in the doorway, hesitant. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and old books, the air carrying that soft tension you only notice when you're waiting for someone to speak. "Hey," I said finally, voice low. She turned, startled, then relaxed slightly. "You came," she said, not a question, but a quiet acknowledgement. I stepped inside, hands shoved in my pockets, trying to steady the rush of nerves I hadn't realized was running through me. "I thought I should," I said. Words felt clumsy, inadequate. She didn't move, just leaned against the counter, fingers brushing a worn mug absent-mindedly. "I wasn't sure if you'd still come," she murmured. The weight of all the unsent texts, all the moments I'd paused and turned away, pressed down. I wanted to say something, anything, but the truth was fragile, dangerous. I don't know if I should be here," I admitted. Her eyes softened, and she took a slow step closer, not crossing the space entirely, just enough that the light fell on her face in a way that made it impossible to look away. "Maybe that's the point," she said softly. I swallowed, heart hammering. The reality of everything, the age, the complications, the children, the past, was still there, solid, sharp. But it didn't stop me from wanting to bridge the gap. My voice faltered. I wanted to tell her how much I'd noticed, how much I'd cared, how small gestures, the brush of her hand, the glance from across the counter, the half-smile over tea, had meant more than I could have imagined. But the words caught in my throat. She reached for a kettle on the counter, filling 2 mugs with hot water. "You don't have to say it," she said quietly. "Not yet. Or maybe never." I nodded, exhaling slowly, because that small concession felt heavier than any confession. And then, with the simplest gesture, she set one of the mugs in front of me. Our fingers brushed again, brief, deliberate grounding. I looked up and saw her smile, faint, just enough to let me know it was okay. Not everything, not even close, but okay enough for this moment. I took a sip of tea, letting the warmth fill the silence, and I realized that sometimes connection wasn't in the words you said. It was in the staying, the shared quiet, the acknowledgement that both of you were here, fully present, even with everything unspoken. Okay, I said finally, the single word carrying more weight than any line I could have rehearsed. She nodded, soft, almost imperceptible. Okay, she echoed. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the tension loosen just slightly. We weren't past everything. We weren't resolved. But we were here, together, quietly, and that felt like enough for now. Weeks passed. Not dramatically, not with any cinematic revelation. Just mornings and evenings that somehow felt lighter, warmer. I still stopped by the bookstore on Thursdays, same time, same corner. The bell tinkled above the door, and she was always there, arranging books, smoothing a shelf, sipping black coffee like it was an anchor. Sometimes we'd share tea instead, cinnamon or ginger, our hands brushing over mugs like a memory we didn't need to name. I'd smile, and she'd tilt her head, a small acknowledgement that everything we'd been through, the hesitation, the stolen glances, the unsent messages, was now part of the quiet rhythm we shared. I thought about that bench outside the cafe, the drizzle, the streetlights, the way words had failed us once. We never returned there, not exactly. But sometimes, late afternoons, we'd pause near a window, watching the street, letting silence do the work that words never could. That pause had become a language of its own. I'd bring books she might like, carefully chosen, and she'd tease me about the predictable taste in fiction, dry humor threaded through every correction. I didn't mind. The teasing was familiarity, trust, comfort. We were learning each other again, not the clumsy, uncertain versions from months ago, but quieter, steadier. There were mornings at 8:47 a.m. when I'd pass her apartment on my way to the cafe, and she'd wave from the window, coffee in hand. I'd wave back, sometimes pause, wondering if I could stay longer, step inside, but often just that small wave was enough. The connection was in the constancy, the tiny, repeated gestures that made life feel whole. We didn't talk about the past, the letters, the near-cross lines, the hesitations. We didn't need to. They existed in the spaces between us, acknowledged in a glance, a shared sip of tea, the way she sometimes caught my gaze across the room and didn't look away. I realized one evening, standing beside her in the soft glow of the bookstore, that this was enough. The warmth in the room, the quiet chatter of customers, the familiar scent of paper and coffee. It was imperfect, alive, and ours. No declarations, no grand gestures. Just us, and the way life had arranged itself so that we could notice each other fully, without urgency. She passed me a mug, our fingers brushing, deliberately brief. I smiled, and she did the same, a mirrored rhythm we had perfected. And as I sipped the tea, letting the warmth spread, I thought about all the tiny moments that had led here. The late messages, the half-smiles, the pauses and near misses, and realized something simple. I didn't need the world to understand this. Just her and me, in our quiet, earned space, and it was enough. I looked at her, and the thought that struck me wasn't dramatic, wasn't sweeping. It was a soft, private acknowledgement. I know you, and you know me, and that was more than words could ever say.